Welcome to Endless, a Sandman podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm writer, erstwhile DC Comics editor, and something unspeakably nasty in the basement, Alisa Whitney.
And I'm story expert and Vavasor of our own domain, Lani Diane Rich. Today on Endless, we're going to be talking about The Doll's House, Episode 7 from Netflix's The Sandman, Season 1.
The Doll's House was written by Heather Belson and directed by Andres Baez.
Names, names, names. Each name is but a single aspect of the whole. Be satisfied with the trinity you have. You wouldn't want to meet us as the kindly ones. Time to wake up.
In The Doll's House, we begin in the dreaming, where Morpheus picks up a red leather-bound book with Rose Walker's name on the cover. As he examines a page in the book, we see the words, Dream History. Then we segue into a middle-class home where a teenage Rose and her little brother Jed are packing. They're interrupted by their mother, who tells them with quiet significance that their father will not permit Jed to leave. Clearly frightened, the mother moves to unpack Jed as the little boy pleads with his sister not to leave him behind. We cut to Desire's narcissistic citadel, where an arch and triumphant Desire summons their twin, Despair. All flaxen hair, ruby lips, and wounded vanity, Desire gripes about Dream's smug sense of superiority. Despair is not sure she agrees. Hasn't he suffered enough, she asks. Caressing Despair's apparently unwashed hair, Desire acknowledges their part in causing Dream's suffering. The Nada affair, Roderick Burgess, but that was hardly enough payback for the high crime of smugness. Keen to embark on a new plan of manipulation and deceit, Desire reveals that there is a dream vortex. The first in a long time, and it is a woman. The woman does not know what she is, but she's already doing what vortexes do, bringing everyone together, including Morpheus. Her name? Rose Walker. 7 years older than the last time we met her, Rose is about to go on another trip. With her mother gone, Rose is low on funds to pay for the PI she's hired to find her brother, who is missing. Jobless and low on prospects, Rose is nevertheless flying to London, where a foundation is paying her for some information about her history. Accompanying Rose in lieu of her mom is Rose's neighbor, the lovely, sad-eyed Lyta Hall. Lyta is mourning her own loss, her husband, Hector. On the plane to the UK, Lyta dreams of her dead husband, while the sleeping Rose visits the dreaming in a remarkably lucid vision of Morpheus and Lucienne discussing her and the missing major arcana, powerful dream figures that include the Corinthian and two others, Galt and Fiddler's Green. Lucienne in dream send Matthew the Raven to surveil Rose, and she hears the word amulet in reference to herself. She wakes in a car outside a lovely old building. It turns out that the mysterious foundation that originally wanted Rose's mother has now brought Rose to this lovely old limestone building, which is a senior care center. There Rose meets Unity Kincaid, an elderly woman who, until just a few months ago, has been dreaming her life away. It seems that right after receiving a doll's house for her 12th birthday, Unity fell ill with the sleeping sickness that afflicted so many after Dream's incarceration. In her dreaming state, she met a man with golden eyes and had a baby, Rose's grandmother. Yes, it turns out that Unity is Rose's great-grandmother, and she is rich. Unity bankrolls Rose's mission to find Jed, sending her back to Cape Kennedy, where she and Jed once lived. Cut to a diner where a 60-something man who dresses like an accountant, a burly bearded man, and a 30-something woman with a smart girl bob are all discussing the loss of their major convention speaker. They need another marquee name to replace the one they've lost, and they settle on the Corinthian, the latest one, as there have been stories about a serial killer that goes by that name for decades. But how to attract the elusive star? The collectors, as they call themselves, decide to copycat the Corinthian, who is off on his own mission to hunt down Rose and use her to put his boss out of business. The collector's plan works, drawing out the Corinthian, who resists the urge to kill the mortals he has inspired to create eyeball sushi. Rose's search for her missing brother continues as she meets her new landlord, a drag queen named Hal, and his assortment of waifs and strays, an attractive young couple named Barbie and Ken, a pair of spidery goth women who might be sisters or lovers. Rose also meets the missing neighbor, Gilbert, a well-upholstered but surprisingly nimble fighter, when he helps her to fight off some attackers in an alley. Unfortunately, Rose's mission to find her brother is complicated by resistance from the foster agency that placed Jed with some friends of their father. Stranger still, the boy is missing from the dreaming as well as from the waking world. We get a glimpse of where Jed is now, on a deserted road, desperately trying to escape an abusive foster father and a cowed foster mother. Placed in the trunk of a car, Jed hurtles off to more abuse, while his sister strolls straight out of the waking world and into the Dream Lord's audience chamber, demanding answers.
All right, so here we are with The Doll's House, episode 7 of the Sandman series. This is where we transition from one story to the other. We had our nice little warm transfer episode last week with The Sound of Her Wings. And here we are moving into this. I mean, I have to say, I love the dreaming. I love the adaptive choices that were made here. The Doll's House in the comics was not my favorite storyline. I'm finding other things that I just enjoy a lot more. This episode of the series that kind of launches this storyline is also probably not my favorite. But what's funny is that the rewatch made me actually like it a lot more. I think I have a deeper appreciation for it. And I completely understand that some love is slow burn love. That's how it goes. What did you think of this episode?
I had a similar reaction. I think my first watch and maybe even some of my second, I was really distracted by the fact that it was laying the pipe, setting things up a bit differently than the comics did. And there weren't as many moments where I just felt, oh my gosh, I love this. But when I went back, and I was watching all of the episodes and I came back, I actually felt differently about this. I saw, there are lovely moments. There is good setup. And, that said, I think this is an interesting episode for me because I'm enjoying analyzing how it sets up for other episodes to come, which I do enjoy more, rather than one that just viscerally, steams my clams.
Well, I like that as a metaphor. All right. So what did you think about the visuals in this story? I have to say, one of the things that absolutely grabbed me that I was so taken with were the flipping stained glass windows to represent what everybody was talking about. I kind of loved that.
I take it you don't mean that as a euphemistic curse. No, those flipping stained glass windows were flipping cool. I had some quibbles with this episode. Okay, so granted, it is very cool, and what the stained glass windows allowed us to do was to have a visual representation in a neat way of of these characters that we are referencing. In the comics, of course, you just have the image and the caption over it. There is my little quibble, which is Morpheus and Lucien turn to the windows as if to say, and look, this is what they look like. Whereas if they had just allowed the images to take place and pretended, this was going on just in the background, that occasionally the dreaming just shifts with Dream's moods, I thought that would have upped the cool ante.
Yeah, no, it does have the element of a PowerPoint presentation. We're missing a laser pointer, with Dream. But it is, it's because the thing is that Lucien knows who they are, and Dream knows who they are. So the idea that the visual of the shifting stained glass, absolutely perfectly, wonderfully beautiful. But yeah, them acknowledging it instead of it just being kind of in the background to give us a sense of so that it's if it was representing what they're thinking about instead of, of being presented like it's a PowerPoint that they're both in a meeting, they're doing one of those endless meetings, pointless. We both know the information. Why are we doing this thing? It does have a little bit of that home office feel to it. But, at the same time, I was so entranced with the unbelievably gorgeous shifting stained glass window treatment that, I was like, all right, I'll forgive the PowerPoint.
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing. The first time I watched, I had a lot of quibbles, and the quibbles often fell into the category of, trust me to, pick things up with chopsticks. Don't, feed it to me with a spoon or a fork or whatever. But on second or third watch, I realized that I had not seen something. I had fallen out of the habit of picking up my chopsticks. So there's something I sort of noticed and I didn't fully appreciate the first time, which was Matthew, the Raven, flying up into the ceiling, the mural on the ceiling, and then out into the waking world. And of course, I'm making the appropriate gesture with my hand so that everyone can see clearly what I'm saying. So then I went back and I slowed it down. So that looks to me like I had to look up the pronunciation. I always mean to take French again, and trompe l'oeil. As I looked this up, I discovered there was also a play that had been done called Trompe l'oeil, which I guess was a trompe l'oeil, which was a play on Trump. But so that references those fake 3D. It's painted to look like a 3D effect. But as we go through it, and I think it literally means deceives the eye. So as Matthew flies through it, it becomes 3D, and then it becomes the actual world, which is wonderfully Maurice Sendak, not in the comics, because how could it be? But this was great for me. But I slowed it down and began to get curious about what exactly is in this painting. And I found some weird stuff. First of all, there's one that it looks a little like Adam and Eve, but then there's a character that looks kind of like a bare-breasted old woman with a scythe and eyeless sockets.
Ooh.
And so was that a grim female reaper? Was that a nightmare? Then I saw something that kind of looked to me like someone is holding something that's got what looks like Despair's fishhook sigil, but it's got multiple hooks. So I'm not sure if and then there's a goat. It's just a goat.
There's always a goat.
So it's kind of fun, on Netflix you can slow these things down. So I encourage everyone to go back and take a look and see what other stuff you can spot in that mural.
Oh, I'm certain there are Easter eggs all over this that, I'm definitely missing because I'm not as familiar with it, and also did not have the patience or even it didn't occur to me to slow it down and take a look. But I love that you did that. And yeah, all of these images that are represented in there may be something that they're planning for a season down the line that they're going to call back to. I mean, who the hell knows? But usually when there is intricate, this is the truth with costumes and with any kind of design work, when there's paintings, when there's stuff, everything that is placed in a frame is put there deliberately by someone who thought about it. So nothing is ever just kind of thrown against the wall, especially not in a production like Sandman. So one of the really fun things to do with your TV shows, movies and whatever, is pay attention to all of the little details, because they will all mean something. And because I'm not as visually oriented, I usually miss that stuff. So I absolutely love that you took that time to pause that down. Another thing that we love, of course, I think you and I both love this so much, is Merv Pumpkinhead, right? The design of Merv, everything about him is just absolutely amazing. I love this character. I don't even know anything about him yet.
His little stick shoulders sort of poking out, his stick, collarbones sticking out.
Yeah.
I mean, at first all you notice is the pumpkin part of him.
That is very distracting, yes.
But yeah, no, I really loved him. Visually, he is perfect. I wanted him to be a little bit more anti-establishment as he was in the comics at first, but then I realized, okay, they're setting something up that's a little different here, which is he's deliberately aligning himself with Lucien as opposed to Morpheus. And it is a little different than in the comics, but I'm kind of seeing that there's something more nuanced and political going on here.
Yeah, and also, let's, take notice of the fact that this is Mark Hamill. This is Luke frickin' Skywalker who is doing the voice work for Merv. And the thing is that, he does a lot of voice work. You'll see him everywhere. He is amazing. And the thing about great voice work is that this person will be unrecognizable until you read the credits. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that was Mark Hamill. So it's so wonderful to have him in that role. And it's a small role right now. But that, I think, is something that's going to be paying off dividends if, fingers crossed, we end up getting a second season.
Yeah, no, I think there's something really wonderful too about the establishment that he says, Matthew, who's Matthew? And Matthew says, Merv, it's me. And you realize they've had this whole relationship, but Merv has not really clocked his name, which actually I don't remember that from the comics at all. And that was a nice moment. It felt very real.
Yeah, it is. It's a nice development of that relationship. And, Matthew being kind of like the new kid on the block at this point, We also have some really fun kind of Tim Burton-y sort of visuals going on in the Florida house, where we've got all of these characters. We've got the weird plasticine, Ken and Barbie, and then Zelda and Chantal, which I think are really kind of neat looking.
They are. In my first watch through, I think my quibble was, oh yes, they're charmingly Winona Ryder-esque in Beetlejuice era Winona Ryder, but I wanted them to be creepier a bit, the way they were in the comics. And then I just started to do a little more digging, and I found some cool little tidbits about the spider pair, the Spider Women, from the annotated Sandman. So I'll save that as a little tempting Lucien's Library tidbit.
Oh, I love it. I think that'll be perfect. Well, let's get talking about some of these adaptive choices. I mean, considering that The Doll's House is not my favorite of the Sandman comics, a lot has been done here to make it so much better. And one of my absolutely favorite things from the entire first season happens in this arc. I can't wait until we get a chance to talk about that. We do kind of allude to that in this episode, which I really love. But so far, I really like Rose. I didn't really care for Rose that much in the comic series. It felt like she was blonde. It was kind of a pedestrian, kind of pretty. She didn't feel like she had that much actual, personal agency. She was damseled quite a bit. She was sexualized a little bit more than I probably would have liked. Here we have a new Rose. Rose who still has the pastel colors in the hair. I really love that we're pulling that through. But we have her now imagined as a Black character, which I think is really nice to see, again, having more representation throughout the cast in a number of different places. And I really like the way that they have kind of rebuilt her. I love the choice for Lyta Hall to bring her into the world, to make her part of Rose's inner circle, to have Hector there, in that background. I think that that's really nice. It's so devastating to have Lyta going through that very active grief space that she's in. And that's something that she shares then with Rose. And I'm sure that she is also grieving Hector, because they had that relationship too, that Lyta and Hector had kind of adopted Rose, when she was going through all of this with her mother's illness. So I love that connection. And I have to say, that moment when Lyta was talking to Hector on the airplane, I felt that grief. I felt that heartache when she woke up and there was just this weird lady sitting in his seat. It was really, really devastating.
It was, when I started to think about the themes of Doll's House, I thought it's hard sometimes to write something when you're commenting on, say, the damseling of women. I think that was a deliberate theme for Neil, that he was trying to look at ways that women were being shut out and shut into houses and not allowed to become their fullest selves. And I think there is a way that this is more successful at showing that we are examining through a critical lens the way this happens, as opposed to playing into it. And
absolutely,
I think that a lot of subtle choices have added to that, as well as one larger choice. When, in the comics, Lyta, I'm trying to think of a way to express this without going too much into the weeds for people who haven't read the comics. So Hector in the comics is off living his Sandman fantasy. He thinks he is the Sandman. Yeah. He's off in this alternate storyline that looks and feels quite separate from everything else. Lyta isn't integrated, and she's sort of a bit player
Yeah.
She's a bit player in a secondary subplot in all of this.
Yes.
And I think if you look at the annotated Sandman, you can see, and this is before I started work, that Neil felt, wait a second, what's going on here? And then realized the fullness of her role and the implications of who she is. And here, because we do know, Neil knows from the outset how important Lyda's role is going to be, he integrates her more fully into the main storyline. And I think that does just make a lot more sense in it. It feels more organic. And perhaps that and a whole bunch of other small shifts in how Rose is portrayed helps it to feel, less like the thing that it is commenting on.
Exactly. No, it's really, really nicely done. I love, I have to say, the adaptive choices have been absolutely wonderful for me and have addressed a lot of the concerns that I had when we were looking at the comics. I'm very excited about Galt. I'm not going to say anything more about that. Most of that is coming later in the season. But the second I saw Galt in the shifting stained glass, I was very, very excited about that. And I love the way that Dream connects the wandering dreams to Rose as the vortex, so that it's not like some weird coincidence that everybody seems like all of these dreams that are out there in the world, just randomly seem to fall in Rose's path. Rose is a vortex. She is pulling things into her path and pulling things that are significant. So I really loved that little touch in the dialogue that made it feel less coincidental and more deliberate in the storytelling, which I absolutely love.
I get what you're saying. I had a little bit, and I'm not completely sure how this would have been done. I wanted to put those puzzle pieces together a little bit more before I got that answer. I wanted perhaps to see all of these disparate things happening and then have someone say, and this is what the vortex does. I guess just perhaps a little bit later in the game. Again, it's a small quibble, but I think, again, the choices are really good. In the comics, we have Brute and Glob, who are kind of these cartoonish characters.
Yes.
Classic big guy, small guy comedy pair, although the small, blob of blobbiness is the smart guy. That's sort of the shift. But I think it makes sense to not have gone that route. Brute and Glob certainly gave satisfaction to insider comics people who remembered them from, which I did not at the time, from some other incarnation of the Golden Age Sandman. But so I think that was a good choice too.
Yeah, I think they're really good. I love them as the prototype of Pinky and the Brain, that you've got Brute and Glob there in the original comics, and they were a lot of fun. But I do, I love what was done with Galt so much that I don't miss Brute and Glob for it. And I enjoyed Brute and Glob in the original thing. So that's how good Galt is. Again, that's spoilery. We'll get into that later. All we're saying is that Galt is going to have a bigger role to play as we move forward in this particular part of the story. But of course, one of the things that I absolutely loved seeing again, are the three, the Hecate, the maiden, mother, and crone, right? They're so much fun. They're so interesting. I love every time they show up.
I do too. So in the comic, there is a lovely moment that we don't get because of the adaptive choices. It's one of those sacrifices that made sense. But in the comic, we've got Rose there with her mother, Miranda, as well as with Unity. They look in a mirror and we see Maiden, Mother, and Crone right before Rose goes into whatever it is, a broom closet and meets the three. And, when we see them in the comic, there's also this evocation of Cynthia, Mildred, and Mordred, the three witches from the Witching Hour 70s comic, which I had read and loved. So there's moments when I miss them. And Cynthia was a very mod witch. She was always saying, you guys are so old-fashioned. Here I am with my grooviness. And
very 1980s Madonna sort of, vibe. Valley Girl, maybe.
No, it was earlier. So it was more. It was so the the dudes who were writing comics in the early to mid 70s were they were kind of behind the times too. So there was this very, I don't know, mod 60s. That's what the youth is talking now. So it sounded old fashioned even, for the time.
Even then, right?
But yes. So the other thing about this, which I loved, is parsing Rose's questions and the answers. And it got me thinking that there is something that truly resonates for me about oracles not giving you the right. I mean, oracles are infuriating. Yeah. They're like the car that flashes its headlights at you and you're thinking, slow down, speed up. Oh, it was a huge dead deer in the middle of the road. That would have been useful if I'd stopped in time. But they're cryptic. And, here they say to Rose, you didn't ask the right question. Too bad. Sucks to be you. We could have warned you, but we didn't. In High Bender's annotated Sandman, he points out they kind of cheat. Because I guess she asks one question too many. Who are you? Protect me from what? And they say, from life and from more than life and the things that, skittle on the window panes of life. But, beware of dreams and houses is hardly, try to avoid all the serial killers coming your way.
Well, yes, that's true. But I do think that sometimes, like if somebody gives you too much specificity in telling your fortune, that it will actually alter the way that things go. And so like maybe there are rules that they have where they can't express. I expect that there's some kind of universal rules and that there's certain things that they just can't say. Also, I think it's probably fun to mess with the mortals. I think that it seems to me like that's a good time for these three.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds in the 10th Kingdom, there's a part where there's these little fairies, and one says, "Oh, it's my turn to be naughty," and they instead of helping someone, they screw them over. Okay, so on second watch, I also have this comment, which is really superficial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I thought that the three who are one showed really excellent 3 iterations of the smoky eye on young, middle-aged, and older women, and it just reminded me. I had a friend, Liz, and she said, we should go to Mac's makeup counter, and we'll get them to make us up, and then we were going to go out to do something. I thought this was a great idea, but the 20-something person who made me up, did something that I guess looks fine on younger women, but suddenly there was a dark shadow over one of my eyes. And they said, well, I don't know why that's coming out like that. And it's because, I had a vein underneath my pale skin. And I said, well, fix it. And they said, I don't know how to fix it. And I'm thinking, come on, I know how to fix it from comic books. If you want to deflect, you put something that reflects light instead of absorbs it to get the attention off of that. Anyway, so I was thinking to myself, a smoky eye is very easy to pull off when you're maiden. And, maybe still not so hard to pull off when you're mother. But I thought, that was some serious sexy crone eye. I loved it. And there should be
they did a great job with it.
I think there should be a Hecate makeup tutorial on YouTube.
Oh my goodness, yes. Message, if anybody from the Sandman production is listening, we would love to see something from your makeup artist. Oh my God, that would be amazing.
But in character. I really want to see them made up in character.
You want to see the 3 of them getting made up in character? I absolutely love it. Absolutely co-sign that request. Hopefully somebody will be listening who will think that's a good idea. All right, so you have some stuff about the pacing of the story.
Well, okay, so this kind of goes back to my quibbling about forks and chopsticks.
Yes.
So, in therapy and in storytelling, there's always the challenge of how much time to give over to relating content. And you don't want to spend your whole session or episode just describing what's going on in your life because you summarize in broad strokes. And you leave out some of the little weirdnesses. And I did feel like in the interest of laying this storyline out, this is a new storyline. The challenge is we don't, not only are we not starting with Sandman, we're not even starting with endless. We're just real world characters. So I felt that there was some way in which things were just sort of laid out very clearly, but things were explained a little bit too much. And I wanted it to unfold with a few more question marks and maybe a little more
ambiguity.
And a little more ambiguity. Annulet is mentioned and then explained right away. And collectors is thrown out there. And then, serial killers, oosh, don't tell. And I thought, it's hard for me to know because obviously I know what collectors are. But I think a little more spacing between the question and the answer, or maybe everyone's just, maybe as a culture we're too ADD to put up with that anymore. I don't know.
Maybe. I think there's a delicate balance in every story. How much do you give away? Like, at what point do the questions become so distracting that people leave the story? And I think that can be really difficult. I think in comics are so nutrient dense, like as far as the story. They are. I mean, my God, in the Gutter podcast that I'm doing with Joshua Unruh, where we're reading comics like deeply, I started to get this sense when we were going through the Sandman comics, because I never really read comics before. And now that I'm reading more and more in comics and seeing the stuff, like the magic that these writers and artists are doing in a panel, in nothing. They have nothing. They have no real estate, and they're able to express so much in a panel. It's magic, guys. Start reading comic books. If you don't do it, it's amazing. But anyway, with all of that density of information that you really need to, like, when you're reading a comic, you cannot read a comic casually. You just can't. You can't like flip through it and be like, okay, that's done. You have to go in and sit down at the table and cut your food into tiny bites and really pay attention to everything. Television, I think, is a much, much more fast-paced kind of storytelling. So when you're going from a comic book, which has so much density, so much stuff packed in there, and trying to put that into a television show, I absolutely see what you're saying, where a little more ambiguity, a little more allowing us to kind of come to that, but also like the task at hand for the people doing this adaptation, especially when so many of the story adaptations that I deeply appreciate, like as a story person, like were so great. Like I understand it. I kind of like having those answers, and maybe that's because I'm more of a story person, and you're so deeply, like, your storytelling is so deeply in comics. We're just coming at it from different perspectives. Like, I like having those answers because I don't have time to waste wondering what in the hell is going on. Like, I just want to know. There's okay to have like some questions open, like, absolutely. But little details like what is an annulet, little details like all that kind of stuff. Like, for me as a TV person, I'm like, yes, absolutely, answer that question and let me just move on about my day. So I think that it's really interesting because I think that we just come from different disciplines.
I get it. That said, I mean, I'm not asking for French film level of ambiguity.
Yes.
Why was the man, wearing that strange hat with a feather? Was he deaf? But
right.
Yeah, no, I take your point. And I think that with comics, a lot of people come with this prejudice that comics are easier to read because you've got pictures, and the idea that pictures you should get to a certain point where you don't need pictures to help you because you're grown-up kid able to read lots of words.
Because you're a real reader now, right?
But comic book readers and comic book writers and artists are very used to one of the principal rules of comics is never supply the same information visually and textually. So you are always, putting together this sort of crossword puzzle that is composed partially of images and partially of word clues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the reason why when Joshua and I started our comic book podcast, we called it In the Gutter, because the gutter is that blank space right between the panels. And that is the space where you as the reader are actively participating in the telling of this story, because you need to look at everything. You need to read everything down to the font choice. Okay, I'm going to go I'm so sorry. I know this isn't the comic books part of our podcast right now. We're appreciating TV, which is what my era. that's like, oh, I love TV. I've always worked with TV as far as like my criticism, and I absolutely love the strengths that it has. But what I've been able to learn about comics and how incredibly sophisticated and the efficiency, like one of my big complaints is always like, tell your story walking, like don't waste my time, you know? And comic books never waste my time. This is a genre that is made for me. There's so much there, but you do have to read very carefully. You do have to be so actively involved in everything that you're processing through these stories. And you need to read them more than once if you're really going to get everything out of that comic. So all I have to say to everybody out there is I cannot recommend reading comics enough. It is such an amazing like reading experience. And the respect that you have for these writers and artists is going to be through the roof. The work that they do is unbelievable.
And Joshua is like, he's like a Talmudist of comics. He will help
everything.
You see all the little, yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, go subscribe to In the Gutter. We're reading Ed Brubaker's Captain America run and then Grant Morrison's JLA. We just finished that season. As a matter of fact, I believe I put the opening episode of that in the feed last week for you all because we had a little hiccup in our recording schedule. So we needed to fill in that space. Definitely like listen to it, read along with us. It's unbelievable. The experience of reading comics is amazing. And if you haven't gone back to the beginning of Endless and read the Sandman comics yet, do that. Go back and listen. We'll walk you through it. Alisa, with her experience and her knowledge and everything, it is the most amazing experience. That was my first like deep comics reading experience. I cannot recommend enough walking through that with Alisa. Having you walk through that with your experience, your knowledge of everything was such an incredible thing. Opened my eyes to the amazing things that comics do. Aww. And I'm so sorry. Now we can come back to the TV series.
Okay, actually, I have something to say about romance. So I was thinking how in romance there is a trope, which is like, I think of tropes as like the required moves in ice skating. Like, how can you do the triple axel? Right. So I love the kiss you or kill you trope. And I was thinking how in this, the Corinthian really gave me that kiss you or kill you vibe. We have only seen him, you know, killing and munching away. But here, you know, he's had to hold himself back, you know, for strategic. I guess it wasn't enough to give Rose a note or leave a note there. She's going to make sure by seducing her house sitter. But yes, I was just thinking how, you know, so in romance, there are so many times that people will watch TV or movies and then they'll do their little wish fulfillment. I am going to anticipate right now there's going to be some Corinthian type romance because there's just, you know, we all do love the uncertainty. Are you going to love me forever? Are you going to eat my eyeballs? What's it going to be?
Like, what exactly is going to happen here? And you know what? I think that those kinds of fantasies are absolutely perfect. And that's kind of what romance does, is allows us to sort of traipse into dangerous areas that we don't need to traipse into in real life. Absolutely.
In real life, I think it's very important to remember that the Corinthian is never going to be your boyfriend.
He's going to be a bad boyfriend, absolutely, from beginning to end. All right, so like one of the things that I talked about and I mentioned previously in this podcast was the damseling of Rose. What happened in the in the original comic book series, that she was in an alley, she's being threatened, there's sexual violence being threatened, there's a sense that that's, something truly, truly terrible is going to happen to her. And then, of course, Gilbert comes in, big man, saves the day, right? And so we set that up. And the thing that I absolutely love, and I know this wasn't done for me, all this was done before you and I ever started talking about Sandman in the podcast, but I love so much that I do feel like the Sandman TV series is specifically made to delight me, that the people who are working on this have similar story sensibilities as I do. So they're flavoring everything like so perfectly for me. But one of the things that I absolutely love is that we open that scene the same. Like, we have that scene, it's starting out, the setup is the same. There are these two guys, there's this young girl. It feels very threatening. It feels like we're going to go in that exact direction. Gilbert steps in, right? And one of the first things too, though, is that they come in, it feels very threatening. threatening. They're like, hey, little girl, that kind of stuff. And then they're like, no, we just really want your money. Like, we're not going to sexually assault you. We just want your money. Let's make that clear. We are going to like traumatize you and threaten your life, but we're not going to sexually assault you. So I appreciated that intention was kind of removed. Gilbert steps in. He's like, I am here to save the day. And then Rose is like, yeah, hang on a second. Beats the crap out of both of them, which I absolutely love seeing happen. And then turns to Gilbert and is like, yes, may I help you? And that, I loved that she took care of herself. I love that she was in that damsel position and then she handled things and then she could develop the relationship with Gilbert. I mean, I love too that Gilbert stepped in to help, like I appreciate that he did that. But the ways in which we often will reduce female characters to being rescued so that we can show how heroic our men are, to see that subverted in this way was so much fun for me, especially because at the beginning it was set up the exact same way. And I was sitting there like, no, don't do this. And then they didn't. And I loved it.
It is really fun. I will say that I think one of the, how can I put this? In real life, if you get into a fight in an alley, you get hurt. And it's probably best that this was not handled that way. But I was thinking that for there was a part of me that thought for both of them, it was a slightly unrealistic, we're just going to beat the crap out of you without having any injury ourselves. I mean, as a kid who got into scrapes, I just do remember you get a little banged up.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I say fiction isn't answerable to reality, right? Like, in neither can you defend fiction by saying that's how it really happened, nor can you really be like, well, that's not realistic. What happens is like, is it believable? Because dragons are also not realistic. Dragons are awesome, but they're not realistic. So when it comes down to it, it's like, is it believable? And I think that like, yes, both Rose and Gilbert after this interaction would probably be, a little bit traumatized, freaked out. It's a trauma bond situation. Yes, I think absolutely. Like if this had actually happened, it would have ended badly. Like there would have at least been injuries. But I do like the idea that Rose, took some self-defense classes, clearly knows how to handle herself and doesn't need a man to save her. It was chef's kiss for me. But that's going to be the end of this section. We're going to go into Lucien's Library where we talk about themes and we talk about a little bit of behind the scenes and deeper analysis, so hang out for that. If you're enjoying Endless, a Sandman podcast, then you should know that it is only through our Patreon supporters that we are able to produce this content for you. So we'd like to take this moment to thank everyone who supports us at patreon.com/Chipperish.
This episode of Endless was brought to you by the Chipperish patrons who support us on Patreon at the power producer level. Thank you to our power producers, Alice, Christina, Erica, Jane, Kevin, Kristen, Michael, Rose, Sarah, Shelley, Stephania, and Stephanie.
All Chipperish supporters get access to the Chipperish Discord chat, where you can pop in, meet other Sandman fans, and chat with the Chipperish creators. And at $10 a month and up, you can even attend live tapings for some of our shows.
Thank you to our intrepid editor, Jack Cram, whose time and skill is paid for through your support. If you'd like to support Endless and Chipperish Media, please visit patreon.com/Chipperish and support us today.
Okay, so here we are in Lucien's Library. Warning, there may be mild spoilers here. We do try not to be too spoilery, but we might have to reference things that have happened in the comics or elsewhere or whatever. So let's go ahead and get talking. In Lucien's Library, there's nothing better to start with than Lucien herself.
Lucien herself. So we are setting up more of an arc for Lucien here than Lucien without the extra N and E had in the comics. I think we can see that there's a little bit of a power dynamic that's being caught up and some echoing of the themes that we saw with Hobb of Morpheus wanting to keep these really strict hierarchies, in place and not allowing the people he is friends and intimates and colleagues with to change. So that's a really nice thing. And then I realized as I was looking things up that I forgot to mention that in the comics lore, at least, Lucien was previously Morpheus's raven, and in fact his first raven.
Oh, I love that relationship. It's so cool.
And it makes it kind of changes how you look at Lucienne and Matthew's relationship too.
Oh, it certainly does, because she absolutely knows what that job entails and how it should be done. Yeah, I really do think from now on that I'm just going to refer to Lucienne as herself. And just let her be the absolute fucking queen that she is in this show. I love her. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the dreams and the houses and all of the kind of symbolic stuff that we've got going on in this episode.
So as I was taking another look at Highbender's annotated Sandman, I saw that Neil had talked about Doll's House as being a kind of extended essay about the role of people in houses and the role and treatment of ignoring women and sidelining them in contemporary society. And it got me thinking about how Hal is sort of trapped by his house, his inheritance. Jed is trapped in a house. We're going to see, spoiler, Lyda is going to get trapped in a house. And it got me thinking how in times of affluence, like the 1950s and the 1980s, houses fasten are used to represent prisons, people being trapped by the stultifying conformity or by having to conform to roles. And in times like we're in now, where people are less certain of their ability to afford a house now or possibly ever, houses fictionally more often represent security, safety, a fortress rather than a prison.
Oh my gosh. And that's so interesting how that can change based on, of course, the cultural context of the time in which a story is written, which is why when you look back at stories and you're like, hey, this doesn't work so well, you have to remember, A, that it was written in the context of its time, and B, that yes, we're reading it today, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't still have incredible value from the time that it was written. As long as we understand and acknowledge those differences, like that's what really matters, But the idea that like the meaning of a house can shift, so that if I'm reading today in a time where houses are more about safety and fortress, a story from the 50s in which that context is completely different, I'm going to completely miss that. And it's not going to have that extra punch, in that moment. I absolutely love that. That's a really neat insight.
Well, that's my hypothesis right now. I think there were a lot of ways in which the 50s and the 80s had some overlap, and how I think the 80s was sort of entranced with a little bit with the 40s and also with the 50s in a way that we are now. I don't know. Well, what are we entranced with right now? We seem to be entranced with the 90s, which seems so peculiar to me, because in the 90s, I thought the 90s were just a rehash of the 70s.
We are. We're very cyclical. We go to the same themes. And I mean, this is like the things that we do in our storytelling as well. Like there are themes, from the Bible, from ancient texts, from Beowulf that are still relevant to us now because those are part of human experience. Although lots of things do change, some things about what it is to be human in this world do not. And we need our stories to go back and talk about this and revisit it and tell that story over and over and over again, which I think is just like, this is part of the reason why I love stories. This is the reason why I've dedicated my life to talking about them, because they are so incredibly powerful, and what they can do is so incredible. They are the most versatile tool, in the psychological toolbox, and I absolutely love that. So you had some thoughts on the Spider Sisters.
Yes.
Our Zelda and Chantal pairing.
So my initial reaction to the Spider Sisters was to feel that I wish they were creepier. They seemed sort of gamine and charming. So I found myself looking to see what notes from the script there were. And so this is a little bit of Neil's original script description on Chantal and Zelda. The smaller Spider Woman is Chantal. We can see her from about the chest up. And then he says, so I'm going to go out of the physical description into, I should mention to people that Neil in his scripts would often say things that the artist couldn't draw, but which informed the drawing. She's the kind of person who asks you on first introduction whether you and she were lovers in a previous incarnation, who considers it the height of romanticism to make love on a fresh grave, who probably has a few bone fragments from a spot of discreet grave robbing scattered around her apartment. She's not a necrophiliac, but if they ever made it legal, she'd run a shop that catered exclusively to them. And Zelda's exactly the same, only in her late 30s, early 40s, and she never says anything, although she whispers. And he says he himself has no idea what their relationship is. Mother and daughter, lovers, sister, friends, transsexual brothers. It doesn't matter, really. They're soulmates. And I loved all that. I'm not sure all of it comes across in this incarnation, but I think now that we know it, perhaps it will inform my viewing of them even more.
Yeah, we can absolutely carry that with us through extra-textual means. But I love that description. And and in having that be part of a comic book script, again, not to bang the comic book drum again, I cannot help it. I'm so transformed by the experience of reading all of these. That the dance between the writer and the artist, the fact that all of those things, that an artist can take that and with impressions sort of, get that across as much as humanly possible, so that we're living kind of with the artwork in this space of, almost languageless impressions, and you do care. And as I was listening to that description, I was like, yeah, I think I did get a bunch of that from the art. I think I did get, you don't get the specificities of where she hides her bones, but you do get a sense that that is absolutely something that you can see that character, that visual depiction. You can pick that up from that. And I absolutely love Did We Sleep Together in Previous Incarnation? That is going to be my party icebreaker from here on out.
I love that.
I think it'll be very, very fun.
So I know we were talking a little before, and there was one kind of adaptation or one kind of representation that you felt was missing from this episode and possibly from this storyline.
Yeah, one of the things that we don't think about, I think, as much now, it's something that we are starting to become more aware of, but is the representation of fat people in fiction, and specifically fat women. Men are more often allowed to, have a little more physical presence without it necessarily being a thing. We've, Gilbert walking in, and he is in a heroic position. He's ready to save Rose. He's sweet. He's avuncular. There's all these kinds of things about him that his larger physical presence doesn't really, matter. Most of the women in Sandman so far have been, at the very most mid-size, which is not. It is not the level of fat that really ends up taking it on the chin in most of our media. And so when I saw Despair, as this, fat, depressed, not looking great, self-harm, that when despair is represented through feminine fatness, at that point, it does feel like that is honestly a lot of the representation of feminine fatness. If we get fatness in women in our media, it is often inspiration porn, watch her lose the weight and gain her value as a human, right? That's the transformation we love to see. Or we just have somebody who is, in despair, who is not, having a terrible time. And the implication there is that because she is fat, that first of all, there is always the implication in fatness that it's your own damn fault and you deserve all the abuse that you get because you're choosing to be this way, as though anybody's body is anybody else's business, which is never the case. So having the only fat woman on the show be despair is where I think the representation has a problem. Again, if we had beautiful, sexy Lizzo type women all over this show, I wouldn't have an issue with this at all. I'd be like, we're doing fine. Because representation is about expressing everything that someone of a particular group can be, right? But what we see with fat women is mostly representations of despair until they lose the weight, at which point they are given their human value. And because that is something that we see so often in our media, because we very rarely are seeing, with the exception like of real women in the world, like I mentioned, Lizzo's freaking amazing and I love her. She represents beautiful, successful, confident, sexy, like fat womanhood, but in the fiction where how people are represented are specifically chosen, right? All of these are specific choices that we make. We choose to represent our sexy, beautiful woman characters as, at the very most a little curvy to extremely thin. And we don't get any opposing representation for fat women. So to see despair represented in this way, to me, like it felt like something that I think we need to examine within our media.
I get you. And, I actually, my first novel was a book called Till the Fat Lady Sings. And the heroine is not actually fat. People, even at the time, said, but she's not fat. And I said, that was the point. Right. The point was she was, slightly perhaps heavier than she thought she should be, but she wasn't fat. She felt fat. Society kind of made her feel fat. And I was dealing with my own issues of weight and bulimia and whatever at the time. I love the fact that in romance, we've had this real transformative moment, and some of the diversity is weight diversity. We've got writers like Charlotte Stein who proudly and wonderfully write about plus-size heroines. And that said, I'm going to push back and say to you, I don't see a lot of men depicted as romantic sexual objects of desire who aren't, ridged. Their abdomen, looks as reticulated as a python.
Yeah.
So, and it's an interesting. Perhaps there is even a little bit of that double standard, because I think of the romances where there have been plus-size heroines, I think the hero is usually depicted as I said, having washboard abs. And I know from talking to men who have achieved washboard abs that there is a lot of abstemiousness and sit-ups involved in the production of that body.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's a different discussion, though, right? Like that doesn't have really much to do. Like, the fact that people who are not fat have body issues is definitely a valuable discussion, but it's a different discussion. And the fact that there are like the male representation in romance novels that men are not allowed to be fat. Let's not even begin to talk about the Thor movie where we've got him in a fat suit. Like that is another thing. The idea, like we do this to men too. It's just that men are more allowed to have variety in their body size and still retain their human value. With women, we find that to be an issue. So, like, definitely all the stuff you're bringing up, absolutely true, but it doesn't in any way, like, I think, change this argument about the representation of fat women in our media.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I applaud you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you. I think that it's just another thing, like, I'm always here to see people's humanity represented so that when we see everyone, no matter what they may look like or what, characteristics they have, that we see them as humans first. And I think that Sandman is doing a lot of really great work in this area. I'd love to see them get a sexy fat woman character on there.
Okay, but human may really not be the right word to use here.
Well, all fictional characters, even if they are endless, are coded as human for us. They are all human to us. The reality of them are always human. So I would say that, even if it's not a human, fat, sexy female, then we can put somebody in there who maybe has that representation, just so that we can see that that being fat does not mean that you have to live in, a dingy sweatshirt harming yourself in your basement. Like, that's not, you can live a wonderful, beautiful, sexy, amazing life, and you have real value. And I think that we need to see that in our media. So that was like, a little quibble that I had with an episode that overall, like, I really enjoyed the adaptive choices. And, the fact that this is how despair is represented, again, not a problem for me if we had other representation, if we had wider representation, if we had more diversity in the way that we represent fat women, that would, not be as much of a problem. But that's really the pinpoint of it for me.
Yeah.
All right. So, Alisa, here we are at my favorite part of the podcast where we talk about our favorite part of the TV show. So or this episode anyway. So what was your favorite part of The Doll's House?
The bad boyfriend. For me,
Oh, man,
Corinthian
yeah.
was the star of the episode. All sexy malevolence. Everything's better with a side of sexy malevolence. My favorite moment was when the female serial killer says, well, you don't look 130 years old. And he says, thank you.
Yeah. I have to say that the Corinthian, as much as I am not necessarily always pulled to the bad boy trope. I mean, I definitely was with Spike and Buffy. That was an anomaly for me. But yeah, the Corinthian is definitely given those vibes. And when he left, I mean, clearly he left the house sitter alive because there was a message that needed to be conveyed. But there was something, like, even in watching this incredibly dangerous guy, like the sex scene with the guy, with the house sitter, was really hot. And I was like, oh man, there's some, he's giving me Spike vibes. He's giving me some Spike vibes. And I got to say, I kind of dig it. For me, I have to say, like, Lucienne doing a census in the Dreaming, that book with the handwriting and everything in it. Merv, Matthew, the, stained glass windows that were flipping around and illustrating everything. Kane and Goldie. We didn't even mention the little scene with Kane and Goldie with the little gargoyle. I think everything in the Dreaming is basically my favorite thing in this show, in this episode.
I think you have the little Raven crush on Lucienne.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. There's so much. I can't even tell you. There's so much that I love about it.
If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, connect with the show on Twitter. Follow @Chipperish and use the hashtag EndlessPodcast, or send your comments or questions to endless@chipperish.com.
This episode of Endless was edited by Chipperish content editor Jack Cram. Jack, I assume you're trying to get my attention. Now that you've got it, tell me why I shouldn't kill you. We'll be back next time with Playing House, episode number 8 of Netflix's The Sandman Season 1. Until then, we do not plagiarize each other's work. We have a code.